There were three main causes that contributed to the civil war during the 1st century BC. First of all, the wealth from abroad served only to make the rich richer. It did nothing to elevate the plight of the poor. Secondly, it became necessary to hide an army from among the Romans' former enemies because voluntary enlistment didn't provide enough men for the expanded military operations. The third reason was the creation of huge country estates and the importation of cheaper and better produce from abroad, both leading to the ruin of the small farmer. To cope with the increasing turmoil, generals, rather than aristocrats, became more and more powerful public figures. Caesar turned the republic into a dictatorship. Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. 17 years later, Octavian was officially handed sole executive powers and was renamed Imperator Augustus. In honor of Augustus' most important achievement, the creation of peace, the Augustan Ara Pacis altar was erected. The Ara Pacis was a symbol of the times. People had confidence in and were proud of their emperor. As conservatives, the Romans looked back over their shoulders to the golden age of Greece for artistic ideals. Yet their art also reflected the vivid realism which was the cultural legacy of their Hellenistic and Etruscan ancestors. We can see it only on the example of the Parthenon and the Ara Pacis. Architecture under Augustus also looks back to classical Greece. When you look closely at Parthenon, many subtle differences are discernible. The front and back are symmetrical, for example, with the freestanding colonnade running majestically around all four sides. On three sides of the masonry, however, the colonnade is reduced to pilasters columns attached to the wall. This makes the facade of the Roman temple a dramatic and theatrical focal point. The Roman temple is usually part of the urban scene, so it's raised on a high podium to give the emphasis. The Greek temple doesn't need this architectural emphasis, for it often sits atop raised and sacred ground. The temple is thus an altar in itself, remote and symbolic in function. Not so the Roman temple. In fact, the front porch often served a practical purpose as political stage for the emperor. This use of the temple is just one example of how the Romans aggrandized the individual. By the era of Trajan, at the beginning of the 2nd century, the empire was the height of its success. With its magnificent highway system, the imperial government was able to keep close tabs on her colonies, again a symbol of an age devoted to organization. No longer were the landed gentry and the rest of the senatorial class entrusted with important affairs of state. Rather, they were sent to govern the colonies, while a highly skilled and trusted corps of professional politicians surrounded the emperor. As the self-importance of the emperor continued to expand, so did artistic expression. In the Roman tradition, many of the scenes describe the practical, down-to-earth side of life. For example, the scene where the army building bridges and fortifications, as well as the green details of battle. Although no attempt is made to suggest space and proportion realistically, the artist's techniques do permit incredibly accurate detail of dress, arms, and equipment. Thus, the historical narrative form proved to be perfectly suited to the typical Roman characteristic of describing their leaders' exploits in painstaking detail.